Welcome back to the MXP San Francisco Modern 20K headliner. We are getting straight into the semifinals. I believe we're going to be watching the Yawgmoth versus Goryo's matchup. Jerry, I am so excited to see how this plays out.
Young wolf enjoyers, let's go.
Young Wolf, we've been talking for the last 2 days about which of the one drops would come out on top, and there he is, my king, Young Wolf, turn one for Jennifer.
Listen, it wasn't about which one would come out on top, it was which one was scariest. At least that's how I was talking about it. Uh,
Sure.
See, even now, Young Wolf, is it that scary by itself? Not really. Is it gonna kill you? Yeah.
That's
So,
scary.
I I don't know, I'm silly.
Sure.
Is it the Young Wolf that's killing you, or the Yawgmoth, or the 30 insects, or, any of the other things?
It's the whole team. It's the whole family.
Yeah, I guess, the team is only as strong as its weakest link. And given that this Yawgmoth team is very strong, I guess transitive property, that means that Young Wolf is very strong.
No weak links in the Yawgmoth team. Now we do see a Agatha Soul Cauldron in Jennifer's hand. Very strong card against Glorious, but there is a turn one Thoughtseize here from Anthony. So not sure she's gonna get to keep it. But there is also an Endurance, which is additionally very powerful against Anthony's deck. So kind of a lot of choices. He is gonna take the cauldron, which I think is very reasonable.
Yeah, that is definitely the harder one to get rid of. The endurance can just sit in Jennifer's hand. That's fine. Anthony can eventually maybe find a grief or something to get rid of it. But once the cauldron is on the battlefield, there's maybe only a couple ways in Anthony's deck to get it off the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was a Grist that she picked up for turn. Don't have the third mana source yet, or any mana dorks, but oh, sorry, those aren't figure poisons. Those are Wall of Rootses.
Yeah.
Yeah, she does have the mana dork. Going to shock this in. See one of those Wall of Roots come down. And Endurance is just online all the time. Unfortunately, Anthony's deck does have a lot of ways to deal with cards in hand.
So many ways. Griefs and ephemerates generally do not have a hand for long.
And we do see Grief. We do not see Ephemerate. But we do have Atraxa, we've got Tainted Indulgence, we've got Goryo's Vengeance. Honestly, quite the hand.
Yeah, it's not bad. If anything, the only weak link here is kind of Anthony's mana base, where really wants that tainted indulgence to discard the Atraxa, but has basic planes as his only land that entered the battlefield untapped, and then
Mhm.
just has a couple of the surveil lands. So I think it was still right to Thoughtseize on turn one. You got rid of the Agatha Soul Cauldron. That's probably the most problematic card for you to deal with. But
Yep.
now his draw is a little bit clunky.
And once again, we've got a young wolf hitting the board. 2 walls, 2 wolves. What more could you ask for?
The wolf pack has been assembled. Basically 4 wolves or
And the
infinite
one
wolves.
the one flipped over card, I believe it was a Grist, so Endurance can be evoked. Oh wait, no, I think that's actually Rusty,
Oh yeah.
which
Quote
still
unquote honest Rutstein.
can also just pay for it with the wall. Gonna flash in Endurance, it looks like. Oh, we're just gonna let it resolve. We're gonna give Anthony the choice of quote unquote honest Rusty and Endurance.
I like this a lot. I Jennifer's initial reaction was to cast the endurance to get the clock in play, but now the grief takes care of the endurance, but if Jennifer draws a green card, she can Rutstein the endurance back next turn and then still have access to it.
Yeah, very smart play here from Jennifer. We do see Goryo's online.
Anthony had a couple opportunities to mill over a big creature with his surveillance and bricked, but I was going to have to contend with just playing this Faithful Mending, I think.
Jennifer going to get in with the 2 wolves, attempt to cast. Rusty get the endurance back. Notably,
And
right now cannot cast it.
not on her turn, but she'll
Not
be
on
able to
her
do it
turn, on his
on
turn for
Anthony's
sure.
turn, thanks to the walls. So it's still online. And now, I don't know. I guess Anthony is supposed to wait to grief until exactly the turn when he was trying to Goryo's, because he used the grief to try and clear the way, and it just didn't really work out. Jennifer just ended up with a grief or an endurance back in her hand.
Yep. Now, Faithful Mending is going to give him some looks, give him a chance to discard some stuff. Looks like discarding, I think that is another grief and an island.
Yeah. I guess the other thing that Anthony could have done is like discard the Atraxa, and since Jennifer can't cast the endurance immediately, if Anthony had like 4th land drop and 2 Goryo's Vengeances, then he could have fought through it.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer just going to swing in for some damage here. And this is one of the great things about the Yogg deck. It's just got like pretty good creature beats, even if it's not comboing.
Yeah, it's not great. It's a lot of 1-power things, but it is a lot of 1-power things. And uh even like the Verdant Catacombs that Jennifer drew could potentially fetch out a Dryad Arbor.
Yep.
And just up the pressure a little bit.
Right, we're going to see land from Anthony. Jennifer is going to fetch. We'll see what she decides to get out of here.
Could just get a Surveil land though. I feel like there are just so many cards that allow Jennifer to win the game on the spot. Like any way to find a Yawgmoth
Mm-hmm.
almost certainly translates into a win.
Yeah, for sure. Looks like that is what she's going to do. Get a look at the top of the deck there. We'll see what she's... That is a Grist. Yeah, definitely a card you're happy to see on top of the deck. I believe Grist is cheaper to cast thanks to Rusty.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
No longer. As Rusty gets Odowared in the middle of combat.
Never feel super happy about bouncing your opponent's Gravedigger, but when it's killing you, maybe
Yeah,
you don't really have any other option.
not quite what you want to be doing. Grist is going to mill. I think that was a Delighted Halfling. Make an insect.
Still has endurance at the ready. The beats are multiplying.
Gotcha.
Very curious to see if Anthony can actually get out of this.
Go ahead.
It's a tough spot. It looks like he is just saying draw, go. Going back to Jennifer's turn. I think that might have been a Takanuma. Didn't get a great look at the card she drew there. But she has a no shortage of options here as she swings in for 3 points of damage.
That puts Anthony down to 7. So in theory, it is still a 3-turn clock. She can play out Rutstein again. The take it down to a 2-turn clock. But also maybe once she presents 4 power, she can just cast the endurance at end step.
Yeah, possibly. It looks like we're going to Takanuma here. And we are looking at getting a Priest of the Forgotten Gods, or possibly a Wall of Roots.
I think it matters too much. Neither adds a whole lot to the board currently.
Ended up going with the Delighted Halfling.
A little bit. It's all right.
And now Grist mills the Yawgmoth, which is probably what Jennifer was looking for.
Yep.
But I think this is okay. Yeah, 5 power in play. Grist on 5. Endurance at the ready still.
Grist on 5, also both Wall of Roots, 1 away from dying, so that Grist can be pretty devastating if it ults.
True. Threatening lethal in a lot of different ways, and also still has that disruption.
Yep.
I mean, that's what we're hoping for, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony really needs something like Goryo's Hand, I don't know,
All right. Surveil.
Subtlety. It's gonna be Grizzlebrand going into the yard. It's like casting Goryos. Maybe just Goryos.
I think that is the way that he's able to execute his kind of combo, but it's not the type of combo that just kills you immediately.
Yep. And the endurance is going to be cast, which Anthony is going to Goryos over. Get the Grizzlebrand. But, I mean, can swing in for 7.
Yeah, I mean, you attack the Grist, and that probably gets chump blocked by the endurance because the Grist lethal, or the Grist ultimate, represents far more than lethal. And given that, Anthony would probably have to pay 7 off the Grizzlebrand. But I don't think that there's even anything that he could come up with. Like Solitude, any amount of Solitudes isn't going to do it.
Yeah, very, very precarious.
All this is happening basically just like 1 turn too late for Anthony.
Yeah, definitely. Just imagine how much different this game would look if Jennifer had just cast the endurance when Anthony griefed her all those turns ago.
Right. And she almost did. She was quick to do that and then thought better of it.
Yep. Came very close to doing it, thought better of it, and was extremely rewarded.
This has happened to me way more than I care to admit, where it's like, oh, look at me. I put a Grizzlebrand into play and gave it haste. I'm doing these fancy things, and then that is followed up by me conceding. Yep.
Yep. Congratulations to Jennifer winning the first game of her semifinals match. We are going to be going into a game 2, Jerry. Let's talk about the sideboards for a second. What do you think Anthony might be wanting to bring in?
Anthony has a decent amount of options. There are a couple copies of Celestial Purge, 2 Subtleties, 2 Supreme Verdicts, a 3rd Prismatic Ending, a 4th Prismatic Ending. Okay. So he does have more answers to an Agatha's Soul Cauldron than most decks that I've seen. So that is good for him. 4th copy of Solitude, Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. A lot of different options, but I would certainly caution against diluting the deck too much. Like, you could certainly bring in something like 8 removal spells, but is that actually what you want to be doing? Or do you just want to have a few key removal spells at certain points in the game? And I think that is basically where you want to be. Like, you still want to keep your engine mostly intact. Things like Force of Negation can go, and then can shave like some Faithful Mendings, maybe Thought Seizes. But definitely has a lot of good options for fighting the stuff that Jennifer's bringing to the table.
Yeah, and for Jennifer, I see in her board she's got a Dothy, she's got another Endurance, she's got a Scavenging Ooze. Definitely some things she might be interested in bringing in as well.
So hateful towards graveyards.
Well, to be fair, they're doing some messed up stuff in those yards.
It's true.
Okay.
I feel like
Look.
honest Bristlebrand at this point. It's like, hey, come on, why are you attacking my graveyard? It's like, you know what you did.
Looks like Jennifer might be keeping 7. I think Anthony is looking at keeping a 6 here with Grief Atraxa 3 lands.
Ephemerate. So it does have the scam thing going on.
Oh, that is quite powerful.
17.
But after that, probably left over with an Atraxa in hand and not much else.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not like Rakdos where the Grief is getting a little bit of a bonus from your scam effect. It's still only a 3-power creature. You do have the upside of maybe being able to get a 3rd card if you want with the Ephemerate, but your clock is very slow still.
Solitude, pitching, drawing.
Yeah, and for Jennifer here, we're seeing an Endurance. We're seeing, I think there was an Ignoble Hierarch in there.
Well, we'll see it all here
Oh.
pretty soon.
We're about to see it all.
Okay.
Grief, pitches Grief. We see 2 lands, Endurance, Bowmasters, Hierarch, Wall of Roots, Young Wolf.
Saving the best for last.
Yeah, put respect on the name.
So Anthony with Ephemerate at the ready is going to be able to snipe 2 of these cards immediately, and then a 3rd on his upkeep if he wants. And so now it is just a matter of trying to plan out the things that you want to deal with, the things that you think are acceptable to leave Jennifer with.
Okay, Ephemerate.
Ephemerate results.
Yep, here comes the Ephemerate.
Okay, so you're gonna play Noble or Young Wolf.
Looks like we
That's
took
more.
Bowmasters first.
Just gonna take
I think that's pretty reasonable. Is a card that
I guess.
can be pretty scary when you're trying to do Gristlebrand things.
Yeah.
Alright.
Second card taken was the Mighty Young Wolf.
I was waiting. I was gonna make you say it. Put respect on the name.
Anthony did.
He
Anthony
sure did.
knows.
Reasonably.
You don't get to the top 4 by disrespecting Young Wolf, apparently.
That's right. I've been saying it.
So upkeep, Anthony gets to Ephemerate the Grief again. Probably wants, well, I could see going after the Endurance. Maybe that was his initial plan, but
Go ahead.
Jennifer having drawn an Eldritch Evolution, maybe that's the more scary card.
Yeah. Ooh, and there's a Soul Cauldron, I think, with that quick glance at the card Jennifer has drawn.
So hateful towards graveyards.
Extremely hateful.
Honest Gristlebrand will not stand for this.
We're gonna get Wall of Roots out.
17.
And I think we're gonna get Soul Cauldron out if that was indeed the card she drew.
Well, not this time, but.
Keep trying to beat you to it.
Or you just love Yawg so much
It's closer
that
to you.
you're having.
It's an optimistic.
fever
Sometimes you see
dreams.
what you want to see.
Yeah.
No,
No.
it was indeed a Soul Cauldron. My dreams are reality.
No?
Honestly, at this point, so are Jennifer's, it kind of seems like.
It's true. No shortage of graveyard hate.
You're in top 4 of a 20K. You're up a game. Your opponent has grief scammed you with an Ephemerate, so they've gotten 3 cards. Could you imagine that your board would look like this at that point?
I don't know. Am I playing Yawg?
I mean, if it's a modern tournament, I imagine you are, yeah.
I don't know. It's not horribly unreasonable. What a resilient deck.
I don't think I did.
But yeah, it is incredible how Jennifer has been able to accomplish as much as she's accomplished in this game, where her hand is being attacked non-stop by this grief.
It just doesn't matter because they're all bangers.
They're all bangers. Oops, all bangers.
There you go.
Combat.
Right, grief's gonna get in, get some damage in. Every Yogg player knows every point of damage is one card that could have been drawn.
Exactly.
Okay.
It looks like we're activating the Cauldron,
Put a counter on my hierarch.
putting our King Yawgmoth in there to put a counter on the Hierarch.
Using every part of the young wolf possible. Young wolf, happy to serve, happy to provide whatever it can.
Absolutely. Hierarch gonna attack, get the Exalted trigger.
Yeah.
Take Anthony down to 14.
Now we're in kind of the same situation as last game where Jennifer started attacking. Anthony has kind of spent everything, and Jennifer still has an endurance waiting, except this time she also has a soul cauldron in place. That's an additional thing that Anthony's going to have to get through.
Yeah, Endurance and Soul Cauldron. So much graveyard hate. Jennifer's gotta be feeling pretty good about her position, especially given, you know, Anthony's sort of explosive hand hate start.
Yeah, I guess you do have to be wary of the grief beats and try to ensure that you win that race. But given like the Exalted, the fetch land that Jennifer has, the Soul Cauldron, I think she's gonna be okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, they're all one up, so it's kind of
Yeah.
hard to find sometimes.
yeah. I changed my mind mid search too.
Yeah.
I guess even
like-
something like a second wall of roots would just shut it down. So
Sure.
Problem is they all look like hollowed fountains.
We're
the one I don't
fetching
want.
here.
They all look like how it found.
Thank you. You agree with me.
see, just like what 4 cards do I need to draw in a row?
Okay, I've passed the hollowed fountain like 8 times.
Because honestly, I
There
think that's a
is
reasonable question.
Black. No, not blue black.
Yeah,
White, black,
definitely,
It's in here somewhere.
definitely reasonable to be flipping through, thinking,
Yeah, there you go.
can I draw any series of
definitely did not
cards
sign right
that
now. I just,
makes this happen?
oh, maybe. Oh, it's right here. It was right next
Maybe
to
if there was an
in my head,
enhanced
I was thinking,
surveillance
no,
on the
I'm fine, that was me.
battlefield, really get your surveil on.
I do that all the time too. I've got basics. I've got the Moonlit basics, so the forest and the
I think anything is probably going to have to start with one of the card drawers
Yeah.
that are not named Faithful Mending. Maybe something like Tainted Indulgence or the Archaeologist into like an Ephemerate or something.
Yeah, that would be a start for sure.
Okay. That your end of your turn, right?
We're
Okay,
surveilling
I'm gonna
away
cast
a land, a lot of lands in the yard. And then we've got a Tainted Indulgence here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still going to have to discard something. I recommend not Gristlebrand.
Looks like we're discarding a Thoughtseize.
Kind of funny because if you're Anthony, you do want a discard spell to clear out that endurance at some point potentially, but if he just untapped and cast a Thoughtseize, he'd be taking 2. Jennifer would endurance in response and just be adding more pressure to the battlefield. So it's not even something that you really want to have happen right now.
Mm-hmm.
Ending?
Looks like we're going to go for a prismatic ending on the Soul Cauldron. In response, Jennifer going to
2, 3.
put an Orcish Bowmasters in the pot, get that Hierarch even stronger.
One of Anthony's 4 prismatic endings after sideboard, almost certainly for things like this matchup. So not too surprising to see that happen. But again, still got a little bit of a road in front of him.
4 blocks all day.
Yeah, that's fine.
Swinging in with Grief.
Huh?
Jennifer gonna go ahead and fetch. a Surveil land.
Possible that Jennifer just deploys the Endurance this turn, and if she wanted to do that, she could also just double block the Grief, which would allow the Grief to trade with the Wall of Roots.
Yeah, I think I saw Honest Rusty on top there, which I think further incentivizes blocking with
Yeah, I can do no target.
the Endurance here.
I lost one of my round ones in trials on Friday because I didn't do a target.
Gotcha.
Move the blocks.
Yeah. Okay.
Which one do you want to?
So double block the
one dies.
Grief.
Oh, this guy dies. Okay.
If you want to. Actually.
Yeah.
You don't.
Right, Anthony chooses the Wall to die.
Well, the Endurance wasn't going to die either way, right?
Okay.
Oh, sure, it's a 3/4. Yeah, you're right.
Hateful and
Wall
good
dies.
stats. Unbelievable.
It's great. It's incredible. Gonna play Rusty. Gonna get back the one creature we can.
Now shields are kind of down, but Jennifer does have a sizable clock in play at least. But it is possible
Yeah, man.
Anthony could play a draw spell, discard the Atraxa that he's been holding on to the entire game, and have the Goryo's Vengeance.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Anthony's plan A is online if he can.
You cannot marsh flats for the blue-green Surveil land, but
You sure cannot, but it does appear to be what has happened.
yeah, we are on kind of a delay here, unfortunately. So,
There you go.
and also don't have a time machine.
Surveil.
Yeah.
All right, I got it. Yeah, I had it back in my hand, but I couldn't like. I didn't make
And
use of- that's why I wanted attacked.
I think Jennifer has 7 on board,
Yeah, because I had it.
and it
if I
looks
discarded
like that is
using
going to
it,
be
the
a
Endurance would
scoop
start attacking me for a
from
minute.
Anthony.
Right, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think if something were to happen, it would have needed to happen that turn, and since the Surveil land did not put the right thing in the graveyard for Anthony, there wasn't anything he could really do.
Yeah, and congratulations, Jennifer, getting into the finals of our modern 20K.
Young Wolf, who knew?
Young Wolf. I mean, she really, continues to show how high her level of skill is with this deck. But Jerry, we are ready to go to our backup feature match. We are looking at Mono Black No Coffers versus Rakdos Scan.
I prefer not.
It's okay. Yeah, we're good.
And if I remember correctly, Joe's deck did not have Grief in it. I'm going to double check real quick.
I'm checking as well. I see no Griefs.
Yep.
I see 4 Bowmasters, 4 Dothies, and 2 Shieldreds. So we are going to see a turn 1 Thoughtseize for Joe, revealing 2 Fables, a Not Dead After All, a Bowmasters, and 2 lands.
Fairly strong hand from the Scam side. Not that uncommon to see them have to take a mulligan also. And Joe running into one of the problems with using discard spells as your source of disruption, where maybe Fable was the card that you prefer to take, but since Christopher has 2 of them, it's like, what are you going to do?
You don't have to do both if you want to both.
Yeah,
Okay, no.
redundancy,
If you want to do both, that's cool too.
difficult to deal with.
All good, thank you.
Not sure what card it is that Christopher drew there,
Yes.
but we're going to have a Dothy.
I think it was a Fatal Push, which is pretty good here.
Gonna line up pretty well.
Christopher may be preferring to get a Surveil land on this turn, but might be more beneficial to just Fatal Push on tap, take 2 from Blood Crypt, and have Bowmasters at the ready, but it is hard to turn down that Surveil value, I understand.
It's good value.
Yeah, Joe's deck's pretty interesting. Pretty similar to the deck that Mason Clark used to win a 5K last weekend in Atlanta. Although cutting the grief scam package stuff for just copies of Profane Tutor. So Joe's deck has 4 Orcish Boardmasters, 4 Dothi Voidwalkers, 2 Shieldrids as creatures, and a lot of spot removal, 4 copies of the One Ring, and no Cabal Coffers and Urborgs, just Sunken Citadel powering up some Field of Runes. So a pretty fair black mid-range deck, all things considered, but I do think it gives him a slight edge in matchups like this.
Yeah, definitely. And Christopher going to go ahead and push the Dothi on his turn, play a fetch land. We're going to see Joe draw a Fatal Push of his own. And pass it over to Chris.
The onus in this matchup is almost certainly on Christopher because Joe has access to 4 copies of the One Ring. Christopher needs to get the game over with. He is definitely the aggressor. Whereas if nothing really happens in the game, the players are just playing draw go, Joe doesn't mind it. You know, that's basically what he wants to be doing anyway. And even has like 3 Castle Lockvoidens to further go with that sort of game plan. So if the early game is just these players trading off creatures and removal spells, that definitely favors Joe.
We're going to see another Surveil land from Christopher. Going to bin a fetch land. Shocks in a land. And we're going to see the first Fable come down. That's going to make a Goblin Shaman token. What a card.
Hashtag unban fate.
Unbanned Fable. It's safe. I'll be normal. All right, we're going to see a Sunken Citadel from Joe. And then just pass.
I'll be normal. It's like a pretty famous Honest Rutstein quote, if I remember it correctly.
Hey, Christopher's going to draw and then have a Fable trigger. Going to discard a couple lands. Draw 2 more cards.
About as good as you can ask from a Fable. It's kind of interesting, though, against the Field of Ruin deck, where maybe at some point you just get run out of actual lands.
Right, because we know Christopher has 3 swamps. Those are all of the basics in his deck.
Either way, probably a ways off from the game getting to that point, so probably not worth worrying about at this point.
Yep, and got a Fatal Push on the Goblin Shaman. Take care of that. And it's just going to be land go.
It's interesting. Christopher does have the second Fable of the Mirror Breaker, right? Could have deployed that potentially.
Does have the second Fable. Certainly has something else he wants to be doing. Gonna go ahead and fetch the end of Joe's turn. Which Joe, as you said, very happy to just be going draw go. Looks like Chris is shocking.
Yeah, like fetching the shock land against the Field of Ruin deck. Keep those basics in your deck to find later.
Mm-hmm. And there's going to be an Orcish Bowmaster. Pinging Joe for 1, making an Orc army.
So we knew about that one. Does the fetch shock mean that there's also another one?
So that's not unlikely. Is indeed another one. Gonna ping Joe for another point of damage. Grow that Orc army just a bit.
The draw go plan was working pretty well for Joe for a while, but he still continues to not do a whole lot. And the Fable allowed Christopher to sift through 2 excess lands that he didn't need. It's providing basically 2 threats that Joe also needs to deal with. The Bowmasters are getting in for a little bit of chip damage, providing an extra body. Like, This is the way that you play through all this spot removal stuff. And in order for Joe to actually keep up with this, he does need to find a copy of the One Ring at some point.
Right. Copy of the One Ring. He does have a one of Damnation. We are going to see the second Fable come down, make the Goblin Shaman token.
The one Damnation makes a lot of sense when you think about how Joe has 4 copies of Profane Tutor, so I do like that quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, land.
There it
And
is.
That is the fun of one of Damnation, which Joe is going to get an extraordinary amount of value out of.
Yeah, I could see a world where your opponent has a Profane Tutor on suspend and everything, so maybe you don't want to overextend, but when that's not the case, how do you play around that?
Yeah.
Especially
And Joe,
when all the turns
still-
you give Joe are just so bad for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Still enough mana to drop those Orcish Bowmasters down.
I wonder how long Joe was holding on to that because he knew that Christopher had at least 1 Bowmasters from the turn 1 Thoughtseize. So it looked like Joe was really not doing a whole lot, but it seems like he has set this game up pretty well.
Yeah.
So you're at 12, right?
And
One damage to you, right?
going to be King and Christopher getting a little extra value from the Fable trigger.
And Christopher's still feeling like he needs to click yes on that chapter 2 of Fable.
Mm-hmm.
Does not want land 5, is definitely willing to take a point of damage and have that Orc army grow a little bit just to filter through 1 card, hope it helps.
Yep.
Damnation
Yeah.
just set him so far back.
Christopher is gonna Thoughtseize away that Fatal Push, but I mean, at 9 life, Joe gets to swing in for 3. Oh, but Christopher has Bowmaster number 3. Take out one of the Bowmasters. And no blocks. He's gonna just take the 2 down to 7. And Joe's gonna play a One Ring. Joe's gonna give Christopher a little bit of extra value from that Bowmaster. Grow the Orc army a little. King Joe.
Yeah, it looked like Joe was just not doing a whole lot, but that Damnation, the fun of one of, as you put it, and a nice little 1 ring top deck. Looks pretty good.
Nice little One Ring top deck. We've got Kiki Jiki online now. If we can stay on the board for a turn, getting to copy the Bowmasters would be quite nice.
Life total's kind of low on both sides. Joe does have 2 copies of Cling to Dust and 2 copies of Shieldred, the Apocalypse, that he could find at some point, though. And now has to be careful about the One Ring activation, facing down and opposing Orcish Bowmasters. But also has this Reflection that is going to get kind of threatening if he allows Christopher to untap. So sort of incentivized to just actually activate the One Ring now in the face of the Bowmasters.
Yeah, definitely a tight game here as life totals are getting lower and lower. Joe drawing, drawing 2 cards. Christopher has to decide where he wants to put these points of damage.
It can be tempting to take the obvious form of value, which is get rid of your opponent's Orc army, especially when you're at 5 life, but Joe's at 11. The ring has 2 counters. Christopher's potentially going to be able to get some creatures through on his next attack phase too. So maybe the chip damage is just more valuable.
I had it like the entire time. Can't play around this either.
Got to close this game out before Joe finds a Cling or a Shieldred, probably.
And looks like the points of damage are going to Joe's face.
For the 5 o'clock Turbo Modern event.
So we're going to take Joe down to 9 to Christopher's 5.
And are posted at the Black Gathering Point.
We're going to see Dothy Voidwalker for Joe here.
Turbo Modern players, please find your seats.
Strong card, but not one that blocks very well.
Not one that blocks well at all.
And Christopher gets to untap with Reflection.
Yep. Looks like he is going to fetch, which is going to go under Dothy.
What does that mean? What could Christopher want land number 5 for? Maybe Shieldred plus activate on the Reflection.
It's now or never.
Yep, Shieldred plus activate could be
I'm
it.
waiting for you to draw more cards. So let's see what happens.
Jeez, who knows? See, he is doing something here before combat.
Oh, it could be Grief, I suppose.
Grief plus activate. There is Grief.
Oh,
2 lands, Lochthwain and Sunken Citadel.
You're at 9, right? 9.
So it's 5 damage right now with the Orc Army and the Bowmasters. If Christopher were to Reflection the Bowmasters, that's 1 point of ping. Joe goes to 8, and that adds 2, so that's 7.
Yeah, so the Orc Army would grow to 5. You'd have 2. So you'd do 8 damage total.
Yeah, so
You'd take him down to 1.
yeah, the
and I mean,
Reflection is a point short.
Yeah, it's the same.
and reflecting the Grief does the same thing, but you might be tempted to just Grief Joe next turn.
Yeah, if Christopher wanted, he could Grief Joe in his draw step.
Right, and then put him in a
But-
position where
No,
can't
actually,
really draw with the ring.
no, this is silly because Joe also has the 1 ring trigger on upkeep, right? So you actually don't need to
sure,
deal
right.
9 damage.
True, true, true.
1 for 7.
Yep, so just take him down to 1, dies to the ring trigger.
Maybe.
I guess you have March as your.
I guess.
Alright.
I mean, can always draw into.
Could try to draw into Cling, but there's still that Bowmasters there too.
Yeah. There's no cling there, so no
You
hope.
had your one up damnation too. I was like,
And that is going to be game 1 for Christopher. And what a tight game that was.
Yeah, that was nice. That damnation certainly looked like it could change the outcome of that game, and the 1 ring did finally enter the battlefield, but I think it came down just a little bit too late, and also just served Joe a bunch of lands afterward too, so it wasn't particularly helpful.
Yeah, not quite the follow-up he was hoping for from that, but we are going to get straight into game 2 here. Seems like Joe's just played a couple lands. Christopher fetching a Surveil land.
I mean, at this point, I might have to go up to 3.
And
Two's been good.
looking at the sideboards here, Jerry, do either of these decks feel particularly well prepared post board, do you think?
It's kind of funny. I'm looking at the sideboards now, and the Rakdos Scam sideboard always has a bunch of cards where you look at them. It's like, oh, these are pretty, wildly impactful in a bunch of different matchups. Strong cards you're pretty happy to have in your sideboard. And then you look at the mono black sideboard, and it's just like, very narrow, certainly still very powerful cards, but not ones that you get to bring in a lot of spots. And that is definitely what it looks like for this matchup, where there are a couple copies of Legion's End, another Damnation, maybe a Liliana. Get some extra removal spells if you want them, but not a whole lot of help. Whereas Rakdos just has a bunch of potentially bigger threats, like a third copy of Shieldred, Bone Crusher Giant if you want that, Liliana the Veil, Pithing Needle, which we saw Christopher put to good use against the One Ring in a previous round, a couple Kolagon's commands, a lot of different cards that allow him to go a little bit bigger, which I think he needs in this matchup, whereas Joe is mostly just relying on his main deck configuration.
Right, which we are going to see that Liliana come down for Joe, get rid of the Dothy for Christopher, but be swiftly answered with a Bowmaster ping. We are back to Joe now on turn 4.
It really feels like Christopher's sweating a One Ring.
Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a Bowmaster of his own. On Christopher's Bowmasters, does he have an Undying effect? He does, a Not Dead After All, targeting the Bowmasters.
Ooh.
But with that on the stack, looks like...
I think that's a surgical.
I think that is a surgical.
I thought Joe was just going to have a Cling to Dust, but I think that's a surgical extraction.
I think once it hits the yard, he is surgicaling it.
Not a card I really expected to come in this matchup, but it certainly looks pretty good here.
Yep, we do get to see Christopher's hand here. We've got a Fatal Push, Land, Shieldred. So we know Shieldred can come down next turn.
Now Joe gets to see how Christopher sideboarded, see what he has to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Get those pesky Bowmasters out of there.
See that the second Blood Moon actually came in.
Mm-hmm.
And the Magus. And the Bone Crusher Giant, the Pithing Needle. So a lot of new cards coming in out of the sideboard for Christopher.
That's going to be Bowmasters dealt with for the duration of this game. I see a Shieldred's Edict in Joe's hand, but not sure what else he's working with at the moment. Of course, we know Christopher's hand. We just got a good look at it. But do not know what card he has just drawn.
Could be anything.
Could be anything. Even another Shieldred. Could not be a Bowmasters.
Joe could have failed to find, in theory.
That's true.
I saw 4 of them go to exile, so I doubt that's the case. But.
Right, yeah. That's the trick. You play 5 Bowmasters, your opponent doesn't know to look for the 5th one.
Yeah, exactly.
Hiding in plain sight.
I've definitely done that before. Used the surgical type thing and was like, oh, my opponent definitely only has this amount. So I just didn't even look for the additional copy, and then they did have it.
Okay, Christopher is going to play a land. Gonna fetch. And we know Shieldred could come down this turn. But Shieldred would be susceptible to her own edict.
Just kind of messed up.
It's very messed up.
But I don't think if you're in Christopher's seat, you gain much by waiting. Again, I think waiting just sort of plays into what Joe wants to be doing anyway. If you're in Christopher's seat, you kind of just have to jam and hope that eventually something sticks.
Absolutely. Considering swinging with his 1/1 Orc Army token, Joe says no blocks. Goes down to 19. Get some damage on the board. And there she is, Shieldred. Before drawing, Joe is going to Shieldred's Edict, Shieldred away. Draw his card for turn. Swing in for 2. Take Christopher down to 14.
Joe doesn't get to do anything else on his turn, but I think that's okay. Dealt with the main threat he knew of from Christopher's side, and is still ahead on board. Down on life, or ahead on life too. So
Head on life. Did miss a land drop, it seems.
oh no, my hand is all gas.
Oh no, it's all
Like-
really good spells that I want to cast.
Yeah, I mean, got to 4 mana. That's the trick. If you're missing land drops at 3 mana with this deck, then it's a problem.
Yeah.
But basically, anything that Joe draws is going to be very live at this point.
Right, and looks like we are casting a Cling to Dust.
Just use it to cycle for now. Save it for later.
Get rid of a fetch land. And swing in for a couple points of damage. Take Christopher down to 12. And this turn we are going to play a land. It's going to be a Sunken Citadel and pass.
Has both a Field of Ruin and Demolition Field at the ready to go with that Sunken Citadel. And those will do a pretty good job of filling his graveyard for future Cling to Dust escapes.
Yep. And we're going to see a K command returning Shieldred and killing the Bowmasters.
That's a pretty good exchange for Christopher. I don't think you could ask much more.
Yeah, very good exchange indeed.
Especially considering that your opponent has a Cling to Dust, is just a couple cards short of being able to escape that thing.
Yep. Now Christopher gonna fetch a Surveil land, take a Surveil trigger. Now we know Christopher only runs 3 swamps as his basics. One of them is on the board presently. So, I mean, Joe almost has what he needs together to really start taking away some of these lands, and that might be part of the reason, Christopher is wanting to bring in these Blood Moon effects to stop that from happening. But here it goes. It begins. Gonna blow up the Surveil land. Go
Using
get
the
some
fi-
basics.
Yeah, using the Field of Ruin too, which is like the forced search. So if Christopher wanted the card that he's railed into a lot, it forces him to shuffle it away. So that's cool.
Yep. Very good play from Joe.
I'm not sure how I feel about Blood Moon in this matchup generally. Like the Field of Ruin stuff is kind of annoying at times. I think the more problematic land is Castle Lochthwain.
Sure.
But there are also just instances where maybe your opponent's black sources are things like the Takenuma and the Sunken Citadel, and maybe Blood Moon just mana screws them.
Yep.
I think it's one of those things where you feel like maybe you don't have better options.
Yeah, sure. Looks like we have Fatal Push, Fable, and Shieldred. 3 pretty great cards.
Yeah, Fatal Push, not great at the moment. I think if Joe had something like a Dothy Voidwalker or a Bowmasters, it might be on the battlefield by now. So Fatal Push might be a card that Christopher is looking to filter away with his Fable of the Mirror Breaker.
Yep. We're gonna see Fatal or Fable get played. The Goblin Shaman comes out. And we're swinging for 1.
Save that Shieldred for later. Maybe Fable helps Christopher find something like a Thoughtseize or a Grief, kind of clear the way, protect that Shieldred a little bit.
Yeah. Perhaps even an Undying Effect.
That works
Lot-
too.
Lots of ways to protect Shelly. Joe attacking in with the 1/1. Christopher's gonna take it.
Love that. Joe's
Yeah.
probably not going to block with the Orc army, and Christopher likely is not going to block and risk an Orcish Bowmasters or anything.
Right, so there comes down the Damnation. Gonna get rid of the Goblin Shaman token, as well as both players' Orc Army tokens. Gonna go back over to Christopher. Fable is going to trigger on chapter 2. It's gonna get to... Doesn't look like he's discarded any. Just gonna play Grief. His hand remaining should be Shieldred Fatal Push. Looking at Bowmaster's second Damnation, Fatal Push for Joe.
All pretty good cards. Christopher has the Bowmasters covered with the Fatal Push that he chose to keep.
Mm-hmm.
Damnation is going to be able to clean up the Grief and the Reflection, though, maybe.
Right.
So I wonder what the plan is for that.
Yep. And Joe plays a Swamp for turns. We still know the entirety of his hand, as does Christopher. As we go over to his turn, Fable should be flipping. You can swing in pretty safely with Grief.
Yep. But Christopher's in a weird spot where I don't think he can afford to develop anything else this turn because of the Damnation. So wonder what the plan is here. Like, even if he did draw an Undying Effect, you still would just protect the Reflection.
Right. And Joe's in a position where he more or less has to cast this Damnation next turn, or it's just going to get ripped out of his hand anyway.
Yep.
So Christopher going to go ahead and attack in. We all know Damnation's coming. Joe's not going to let his Orcish Bowmaster get caught in it. Here it is, destroying all creatures.
Fun of in the main deck. Adding a second copy in from the sideboard. Both of those look pretty good.
Found all of them, both games.
Yeah, no
Creatures
Profane
are
Fever's
going to
necessary.
die. Mm-hmm.
But again, Joe does need to do something. Needs like a Castle Lochthwain, copy the One Ring. Does still have that Cling to Dust in the graveyard, which is going to be useful, assuming he doesn't have to spend his mana dealing with any threats that Christopher presents, but could potentially let him grind through this game. It'll just take a while.
Right, but now that we have sort of forced out this Damnation, we do know Christopher still has a Shieldred, which maybe he feels safe to play now.
You know, last time you saw Joe's hand, had a push into Damnation. Those are gone now. You know, one of Joe's 2 remaining cards is a Bowmasters, which you have covered with a Fatal Push. So it's certainly possible that Joe has something to deal with Shieldred, but what are you going to do? You know, keep waiting?
Right, so Shieldred is going to get played for Christopher here. And Joe is going to flash in the Bowmasters. Looks like pings Christopher's face.
think that is a pretty good indicator that Joe does not have an answer. Willing to go to his draw step and take the hit from Shieldred.
Yep. Gonna play another swamp. Pass over to Christopher. We know Christopher has a fatal push in hand. Not sure what the other two cards are. Don't know what Joe has, but it's certainly not an answer for Shieldred.
Yeah, life totals were getting pretty low for both players, but now Christopher's starting to get that buffer from the Shieldred.
And it looks like we're going to see Angrath's Rampage come down. And Joe will sacrifice a creature. And then Christopher's just going to push the Bowmaster. Make sure he can get in with damage from Shieldred. There's another Bowmaster.
Yeah, it seemed like Christopher sensed a little bit of weakness there, willing to use two pretty good removal spells to clear the 1/1s out of the way. Just trying to get this game over with.
Yeah, and feeling like Joe definitely does not have a answer for Shieldred. Seems like a good time to try to push the damage through. Looks like Joe is going to cling to dust now.
So could choose to hit a creature and get a little bit of a life buffer, but I feel like probably needs to draw a card.
Yep, gonna get rid of the Fable. Gonna draw a card, gonna trigger Shieldred, go down to 10 life. Draw another card, go down to 8 life off the Shieldred trigger.
But now 2 cards to work with. Looks like still enough cards in the graveyard, or at least close to it, to escape the Cling to Dust.
Mm-hmm.
So could potentially go back to the well for one more time, but looks like Joe drew 2 pretty reasonable spells here.
Yeah, I would say so. We've got a Legion's End and a One Ring in there.
The
One
Legion's End,
Ring gonna be painful on the draws, but is going to keep him safe for a turn.
yep. And Legion's End, another card that came out of the sideboard, but not something that deals with Shieldred.
Does not deal with Shieldred. It's going to be a Dothy Voidwalker for Joe.
Okay, honestly, that's pretty strong because then if Joe is able to draw a way to deal with the Shieldred, now maybe it becomes his Shieldred.
Christopher going to go up to 11 life.
Christopher wanting to attack, but then remembering the One Ring protection.
Mm-hmm. The draw trigger from Shieldred will take Joe down to 4. The ring will take him down to 3. Of course, there is still a Cling. Actually, is the Cling to Dust online?
I think Joe is a card short, but
He is 1 card short.
yeah, but does have like Sunken Citadel and Demolition Field. So
yeah, can get the card in there for sure. But Joe is going to go down to 3.
Oh, and the card he drew is a Profane Tutor. This seems to happen all the time to Joe, where the tutor just shows up a little bit too late.
Yep, swing in with the Dothy, might as well. And looks like we are going to suspend the tutor. and pass.
Pretty classic.
So
May just end
Jo-
up dying with the Profane Tutor still on suspend.
Yep. Dead to any removal. But otherwise can live for a turn.
Yeah, also has enough mana available to activate the Demolition Field and then escape the Cling to Dust, which will
Mhm.
probably be the last time, at least in the near future.
Yep.
The potential 3 extra life to work with off that.
Yeah, I can get up to 6, which would take you back down to 3 at your next turn after you draw. Shieldred gonna take Christopher up to 9.
That buffer has been super helpful for Christopher.
Yeah, absolutely life-saving.
I think any piece of interaction basically ends it. Christopher is able to connect with this Shieldred, even despite Joe being able to gain a little extra life there. Yeah, I think Joe might just be able to look at one more card, and that might be it. It's got to be an answer.
Yep. Christopher thinking for a bit here.
Tank, 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 lightning bolt you.
Yeah, while he does definitely have a strong position, sure he knows that if Shieldred does get dealt with, becomes a bit trickier.
Yeah, especially with Joe having that Dothy too.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher's working with. Because if you have a way to kill the Bowmaster, I think you just do it.
Yeah, I can't think of a reason why you would not.
And if you don't, I think you're still attacking because Joe just has to block.
Oh, there's the
Okay.
way to kill the Bowmaster, which this should be game.
So Joe at 3 life, facing down a Shieldred. Can do some Cling to Dust stuff, but not going to be enough.
Not going to be enough. That is going to be game and match for Christopher, our 8th seed in the top 8, beating the 1st seed, beating this mono black deck from Joe, getting into the finals of our tournament against Jennifer and her Yawgmoth deck. We're gonna take a little 2-minute break here before we get into the finals. But Jerry, I am so hyped to see this Yawg versus Scam battle for the finals of our 20K event.
It's like nothing has changed in 6 months.
Oh, it's beautiful. All right, see you in 2 minutes.